The photograph makes a promise the second you open its case. Joy, fixed forever. It is an 1890 wedding portrait, the kind every parlor hoped to display, bride and groom centered under painted pillars and a hint of a garden that never required watering, their names penciled on the back in the neat hand of a cousin who cared about posterity. The mount is cream, its gilt rule bright even now. The studio stamp, R. D. Salter, Photographic Rooms, Market Street, advertises respectability as much as skill. He arranged sittings for dignitaries, for shopkeepers who wanted to look dignified, for families who saved for the luxury of being remembered. At a glance, it succeeds. The groom stands as men were taught to stand, one hand on the chair back, the other near his watch chain, a ring catching light like a small opinion. He is in his 30s, jaw combed square by the tailor, hair parted with a precision that hints at accounts balanced and ledgers that never stray. The bride sits with her bouquet lifted a pleasing distance from her bodice, veil pinned like hoarfrost to a wreath of wax orange blossoms. Satin lends her shape a certain grace. Lace lends her throat a certain innocence. On the floor, the train spreads like spilled cream. But the longer you hold the picture, the less it keeps its promise. The room around you thins. Your eye, which has been taught all your life where it ought to rest, disobeys the usual choreography, collar, boutonniere, hem, and goes where photographs rarely want you to linger. The human face, not as arrangement, but as argument. The bride's smile is careful. It has the shape smiles take when they have been practiced in glass. Her lips tilt correctly, and the corners agree to rise. But the smoothness stops at the mouth. Above it, the muscles betray her. The skin between her brows knits into the faintest vertical crease, two pale threads pulled tight. The right eyelid has lifted a hair more than the left, not the way a flirt does it, but the way a person does when trying to see through something without letting anyone notice she's trying. It's not only that the smile fails to reach the eyes, it is that the eyes refuse the appointment. Joy was scheduled. She did not arrive. Lean closer. Yes, closer than courtesy would advise with a stranger's face. And another wrongness introduces itself. The photographer's lamps have placed their little squares of light in the groom's pupils, neat white windows. In the bride's, the catch lights are not square. They are round and halved, crescents tilted, as if something circular, something moving, caught her gaze at the last second. There is the impression of a wheel, a gleam on brass, the brief white of a turning rim, and below the right eye, almost lost in the wash of satin and the resolute calm of the emulsion, a shadowed seam, the faintest swelling, the suggestion of a bruise that was powdered, not erased. Once you have noticed her expression, the portrait stops being a wedding and becomes a question. What do you look at when you are asked to look joyous and cannot? Her name is Marion Cobb, though she will sign her letters for the next decade Marion C. Ellery, with a hand that learns, in time, to enjoy its loops. The groom is Daniel Ellery, a reputable man whose respectability is the kind that needs no adjectives. He owns a share of a coal yard and a small warehouse near the canal. He does not drink more than is fashionable. He does not laugh more than is fashionable. He will never be accused of extravagance, either in affection or in cruelty. He was never meant to be a story. He was meant to be a safe ending. There was someone before him. Of course there was. You can see him only by walking back to the morning of the photograph, and then farther back, and letting the hours rearrange themselves. The house where Marion woke on her wedding day smelled of starch and coal and flowers in paper. Windows whistled where putty had given up. The bed had been moved to the front room the night before to keep lace out of the upstairs dust. A dressmaker's dummy turned in the corner like a missing guest. On the sideboard, the bouquet waited in a basin. Orange blossoms, not real. The wax ones outlasted vows better. A ribbon trailed. Under it, something lay folded in a square of linen, tied with blue thread. Marian lay awake from before sunrise, the way people lie awake when there is a ceremony planned for them, and none planned for their heart. She listened to her mother move in the kitchen, the small clack of the tin containing pins, the squeak of an opened drawer, the polite conversation of cups returning to saucers. The house breathed with the strain of making a future respectable. Her mother had done this before, for two girls older than Marian, who had learned to inhabit the lives the town assigned them. She would do it again for two younger, if expense and weather allowed. When the clock cleared its throat at 6, Marian rose. She pulled a dressing gown close for decency and to hold herself together. In the mirror above the washstand, her face surprised her. Not because it looked happy or unhappy, but because it looked like she had already become someone else, and no one had told her. She dabbed at her cheekbones with water to coax color. She knotted her hair the way the dressmaker had taught her and pinned and repinned until the coil consented. She pressed her fingers along the line of her jaw and felt the tenderness there, last week's argument with a door that had learned to shut too loudly. She had never told a lie for her own sake that convinced her, but she was very good, it turned out, at telling them for the sake of others. She crossed to the sideboard and untied the blue thread. Inside the square of linen lay a locket, pearl-fronted, its hinge resisting as if it had learned to keep secrets. Beside it, a twist of hair, the shade that lives somewhere between brown and wheat, finer than thread, braided and doubled. She lifted it, the way one lifts a small creature one is afraid of waking. It was Prudence's hair. Pragmatically, it was what people called things then kept. Truthfully, it was a prayer with weight. Prudence had come in February and gone in March, a baby who had glanced once at the light the way a bird glances through a barn door, and then chooses a dark beam instead. Marian had told almost no one. Daniel knew. The midwife had told him because midwives do not recognize a town's arrangement of delicacy as a binding agreement when a woman's life or reputation is at stake. Marian's mother knew, of course. Mothers are the furniture sorrow insists on, and had said all the right sentences in the wrong order. The minister had guessed, which is their skill, and applied balm named Providence and God's will that burned exactly as much as it soothed. The town did not know, not officially, which is the kind of knowing that saves lives and ruins them in the same hour. Marian had tucked Prudence away where the town could not ruin her. A lock of hair in the locket, her second name written on a scrap and slipped between the locket's shell and its lining. Daniel had mentioned, once and only once, that it was best not to speak of infants that had not yet taken their place in the register. After, he developed a genius for changing subjects. Marian fastened the locket's chain and let it fall beneath her chemise, warm against bone. Then she sat and opened her palms and simply held the ribbon of hair for a time, until the house's hurry pushed at her back. She wrapped the hair around her fourth finger, once, twice, 3 times, and slid on the glove. The hair stayed, a thread you could not see unless you knew where to look and wanted very much to see it. In the studio, Mr. Salter prepared his plate. He worked quickly and reverently, as men do who handle liquids that can erase or reveal with equal efficiency. The assistant adjusted the headrest, the iron post that held an upholstered crescent, a quiet violence that masqueraded as kindness. He made it taller for Daniel, shorter for Marian. He tugged at the train and made a little fan at its edge. He paused at her face. He was young enough to say, "Relax, miss," and old enough to hear the impropriety of it and redden. "Madam," he corrected, and moved his hand in the air where he wanted her chin to settle, as a conductor suggests a tempo he's not sure his orchestra believes in. Marian looked at the camera's black eye, and then just left of it. Instruments make demands. She complied. She lifted the bouquet as requested. Daniel's hand settled on the chair back in the position Mr. Salter had chosen, a grip that looked like steadiness, and was perhaps exactly that. The lamps warmed the dust. At the last second, the studio door opened a crack. The assistant hissed a whisper, "Sir," and then stopped, because the word "sir" belonged to customers and bosses, and sometimes to fate. The door admitted the edges of a wheel, the brass ring of a perambulator, a nursemaid's hand in a glove that meant hire, not kin. The maid had the face of someone who had been trained to make bad news look like duty. Behind her, in the corridor, a murmur, the sister, the cousin, the neighbor, come to explain that Mrs. Cobb had sent word, and they were only returning the dress they had borrowed for a fitting. And could the maid please? The maid had taken a shortcut through the photographer's entry rather than knock at the front and disturb the ceremony that was already in progress. Marion didn't see the maid's face. She saw only the wheel, the low gleam of it, and heard the tiny sound the brake made when a careful person sets it. Not a squeak, not a grind, a click. Her body made its decision, eyes to the wheel, to the hidden basket beneath the blanket, as if looking could make looking count. She held. She did not turn her head. Her mouth stayed in its practiced curve. Her eyes refused their appointment. The shutter opened and closed. Mr. Salter replaced the cap with the solemnity of a man who believes in seconds. The assistant hustled the door shut and mouthed something that looked like sorry and hurry at once. The maid backed out the way she had come, careful, the wheel receding. The room's air took back its shape. "Another exposure," Mr. Salter said, in the tone one uses for insurance policies. "For safety." The second exposure caught compliance. The third caught something like relief, or its twin. None of them erased the first. Later, in the darkroom, Mr. Salter placed the first plate in the developer and watched as the emulsion decided whether to admit its memory. The image came like weather on glass, first cloud, then clarity. He saw it then, the bride's mouth obedient and her eyes elsewhere, pupils holding curved lights where square ones should live. He considered, this man who understood the taste of chemicals better than the taste of his own dinner, retouching the eyes to make them do the thing eyes do that the world understands. He could paint a dot, a square, a kindness. He could take a pencil and soften the furrow between the brows. He had done it before for people who wanted portraits of themselves as they wished to be accused of. He set the pencil down. Whatever else he altered that day, chin, shine, a stray hair, the eyes he printed as they were. The print you hold, if you are lucky enough to hold it in anything but memory, is the first of those. That is why the bride's expression looks like a verdict she has delivered to herself. The wedding followed the script: church, register, cake, 2 toasts that were more gratitude than wit. Daniel accepted handshakes the way you accept deliveries. Marion accepted congratulations as if they were parcels she had agreed to forward. The brothers-in-law carried the trunk to the carriage. The younger sisters whispered in a corner, the secrets that keep younger sisters alive. The bride's mother stood for a moment in the doorway and let out a breath she had kept for 3 months. "Done," she whispered, not because joy had been achieved, but because something had reached the end of its shape and had to be named. In the new house on Spring Street, the wedding portrait found its place above the mantel. Daniel nodded to it sometimes, a man pleased with the idea of himself as someone who had a mantle that required supervision. Marion dusted it every Monday. She used a square of lintless cloth and moved it as she moved through the rooms, steadily, without argument. She felt, each time, the urge to touch the paper above her own mouth and smooth the expression as if it were a wrinkle in cloth. She did not. She learned to live beneath her own gaze. Marriage to Daniel was like a floor you learned to walk on lightly. It did not give. It did not creak when you wanted it to. It was not cruel to her in the way stories prefer for their villains. He was careful with money. He came home at the hour he said he would, or wrote a note delivered by a boy who thought of himself as a runner. He slept the sleep of a person who had learned how not to owe. He took tea with lemon. He believed that pain should be managed privately and joy publicly, though his definition of joy never called for noise. 3 times, Marion removed the locket at his request. The request smoothed into a remark. How dress lines sit better without a chain. How some mornings can do with less waiting. How certain occasions benefit from the clean line of a throat. 3 times, when the house was sleeping, she put it back on. She dreamed sometimes of being photographed again, of practicing her mouth until it agreed to tell the same lie as her eyes. She woke and said to the ceiling, gently, because the house did not need scolding. Not yet. 5 years passed. There were dinners and dim Novembers, and a summer so hot she learned the mercy of shade as a sacrament. There were 2 pregnancies that stayed, and 1 that did not. There were small trips by train to places that believed themselves to be holidays. There was a cat that adopted them, and then decided she had more interesting people to supervise and left them without a scene. There was laughter, sometimes hers, often others. And then there was a winter that carried illness in it like a candle nobody asked it to hold. Daniel coughed. The cough had nothing to do with coal dust, and everything to do with lungs that had decided the air outside was a hostile country. The doctor prescribed rest, and rest prescribed debt, and debt prescribed the sale of shares in the warehouse. Daniel sat in his chair and looked not at the portrait, but at the mantel just below it, where fire left ash like a signature, even on days it didn't burn. He did not complain. He did not become kind where he had been merely decent. He remained Daniel, which is a sort of courage too. Marion took in alterations. She turned old dresses into slightly less old dresses for women whose husbands continued to bring home money when the city had forgotten why theirs did. She learned that the difference between mending and making is not skill, but story. In March, always March. Why is it always March? A letter came from a woman who signed herself simply Nurse Finch, though the pen did not belong to Patience. It was addressed to Mrs. Ellery, née Cobb, and it was written in a hand that had won 2 prizes and learned the habit of humility afterward. Nurse Finch worked at an institution on the edge of the city, known for its foundling billets and for training girls who could not afford mistakes in enterprises that forgave none. She was not writing to sell the woman anything. She was writing because a child had been left on a cold night 7 years earlier in a wicker pram with a note, Prudence, and a twist of hair, and the word, please. Prudence had been taken in, named by the note, fed by the generosity of those who gave generosity to places that made them feel like they were the ones who had been saved. Prudence had not died. Vacancies occur. Miracles occur. Sometimes they share a handwriting. Nurse Finch had noticed the twist of hair because she had been a girl once too, and a mother once too, and because she recognized the kind of blue thread that people use when they mean to make something matter without saying it aloud. She had also seen, on a visit to a parishioner perhaps, or on an errand to deliver a baby's cap repaired with magnificence, a wedding portrait on a mantel that showed a bride whose eyes had not consented to the moment. She had stored the face like a key in the place women keep keys. Nurses live by recognizing people who are trying not to ask for help. Her letter did not accuse. It did not offer shame or rescue. It offered a sentence written 3 times, because some truths need to arrive with more than one voice if they are to be believed. If you are she, Nurse Finch wrote, you may come. If you are not, forgive this intrusion. If you are uncertain, come anyway. Marion stood a long time with the letter in her hand, the house making the noises houses make when they are content to be houses. The portrait watched her. She watched it. For the first time since the day they had sat for Salter's lens, she liked the expression on her own face. She recognized it. It was the look of a person deciding to be the one to decide. Daniel read the letter and did not say no. That was what he offered, and it was not nothing. He was not a man to whom children naturally confessed. He was a man to whom children asked permission to leave the room. But he was also drifting toward a horizon that took breath as duty and then asked for more. "If you must," he said, and coughed as if to punctuate. "If you must," he said again, and then, when she did not move, "There is a cost to wanting." "There is a cost to not wanting," she said quietly, and left before the remark could bruise him. The institution was a brick square made briefly beautiful by sky. The matron was not Nurse Finch. The matron had short verbs and clean collars. Nurse Finch came from a room that smelled of soap and sleep, wiping her hands on her apron as if trying to erase the history they had just made. She was middle-aged and exact. She had the kind of eyes that do not pretend the world is otherwise than it is, and do not surrender to the lesser story of hopelessness. "She is learning to read," Nurse Finch said, and led Marion down a hallway that carried the echo of small feet. "She believes in the lookout tree," she added, and did not explain until Marion raised a brow. "A tree at the far edge of the grounds from which you can see the road. The children call it the lookout. She takes 2 turns a day, at 5 and at 6. Children believe in schedules the way the rest of us believe in doctrine. They reached a door whose paint had decided to be practical rather than lovely. Nurse Finch knocked and did not wait. Inside, 10 little beds, 10 little trunks, 10 little lives learning the discipline of being unextraordinary. In the near bed, a girl with hair that liked to escape whatever it was put into. She turned at the sound of the knock, and then the door, and then the woman, and did not rise because she was still the girl who asked the room's permission before every movement. She sat up instead and squinted, not because her eyes were weak, but because the world is large when you are making a size for someone in it. "Prudence," Nurse Finch said, the way people speak to ships. "Steady now. You have a caller." The girl's chin lifted in the manner of a person who has learned not to rush a moment lest it run away. Marion did not move for a second because the second was holy. They looked at each other. The locket warmed against bone, the hair around Marion's finger, which she had wrapped that morning as if consent needed to be reenacted, pressed into flesh. The girl smiled, not the smile the town had taught people to interpret, but the animal smile that happens when recognition and hope and bewilderment decide to braid a rope between 2 people and pull. "I am your—" Marion began, and Nurse Finch, bless her, did not require that she say it. She left the room and closed the door on a silence that felt like the opposite of emptiness. There are no good words for reunions that do not declare themselves in newspapers. The best ones are awkward. They proceed by inventories. "Do you like soup?" "Sometimes." "Do you sleep well?" I look at the window. "Do you run?" I am not allowed to run in the hall. "Do you know a story about rabbits?" "Yes." "Do you like your name?" "Sometimes." "Would you like another?" "No." "May I touch your hair?" "Yes." "Do you have a locket?" "No." "Would you like one?" "Yes." The locket stayed that day hidden. Marion did not perform, did not declare ownership with trinkets. She asked if the girl liked trees. The girl said she liked the lookout. She asked if the girl liked walking. The girl said she liked walking to the lookout. They walked to the lookout together. Daniel did not forbid the visits. He did not attend them. He did not sell more than he had. He did not make speeches. He coughed and tried to eat and took an interest in the weather, which is how men admit they are not in charge. When he died in the autumn 2 years later, his passing was the kind that requires neither exegesis nor apology. He had been decent. He had been limited. He had been hers when she needed a kind of shelter that was made of paper and people's good graces and chimneys that drew properly. At the funeral, Marion stood in the dress the dressmaker had taught her to trust and did not cry because the crying had been done already, elsewhere, for other reasons. She brought Prudence home the following spring, after the papers had been signed and the money arranged and the matron satisfied. The adoption was called regular, which in the law's mouth means smoothed to the polite fiction everyone prefers. Prudence slept in the room that had been prepared for children who had not stayed. Marion read by the door, so the room would learn to listen for pages turning. She told no grand tale about why the child's last name was the one everyone would recognize. She told the greater truth by doing grocery lists and laundry, and correcting sums and listening to the way a child applies fear to the ends of her pencils. The portrait remained above the mantel. Prudence asked no questions about it for a year. Then she asked one, the right one, the kind that children ask when they suspect the world is made of stories and are testing which ones are theirs. Why do you look like that? Like what? As if you are looking at something else. I was. What was it? A wheel, Marion said. And everything under the blanket it turned. Prudence thought about this for 7 days, the number of days she took to think about anything she intended to keep. On the 8th, she said, "Thank you for looking," and went outside to the tree because the lookout had taught her to reward clarity with height. If this were the sort of tale that insisted on a moral written down in ink, that would be the sentence. Thank you for looking. But photographs offer something messier and better than morals. They offer practice. In 1932, the portrait passed to Prudence because the house passed to Prudence, because Marion, having taught the windows to open and the bills to be paid, and the cat to come when called only once, died as cleanly as a person dies who has lived a complicated life in a way that refused spectacle. Prudence hung the photograph in her own front room and did not hide it in the sensible embarrassment people sometimes bring to their parents' faces. She told her children the story in the correct order: the wedding, the wheel, the eyes that disobeyed, the nurse with a letter that did not accuse, the room with 10 beds, the lookout tree. She gave them the locket when they were old enough not to barter it for anything smaller than a life. In 1971, a local historian named Mrs. Deering, brisk, benevolent, devout in the religion of paper, collected portraits for an exhibit titled Joy and Ceremony. Prudence loaned the wedding picture. She wrote the card herself, her script careful, because certain words are not to be trusted with strangers' hands. This portrait belongs to my mother. If you look at her eyes, you will see her looking at me. The wheel you can't see is the one that brings me back. The curator read the card and swallowed, which is the museum professional's way of agreeing to love someone else's truth. People came to the little room with its little labels. They looked. Some admired lace, some counted buttons, some said, "They do not smile as we do," as if history were a matter of dentistry. The ones who mattered lingered. They leaned. They put their fingers to the glass and then apologized to the attendant because the modern world has taught people to ask permission after they leave fingerprints. A school child squinted and said, "She looks like she knows a joke she's not telling." A man with a damp handkerchief said, "She looks like she is not allowed to laugh at the part of the joke that's funny." An older woman, alone, whispered, not prayer, not comment, something between, "I know that furrow." And that was better than any label Mrs. Deering could have written, because it recognized expression as biography. The woman left and went home and took down her own wedding picture and looked for the place where Joy had been scheduled and something else had attended instead. She phoned a granddaughter and said, "I have a story for you," and began to practice the family's private truth aloud. In 1999, a conservator noticed a hairline crack in the mount and unframed the portrait to stabilize it. Between the photograph and the backing paper, pressed as neatly as a specimen, lay a scrap in a hand that made letters brave by making them small. Prue. If anyone tells you I did not look for you, they are wrong. M. The conservator, who understood that secrets can be both fragile and explosive, insisted the scrap be included in the data file and then replaced it where it had made a home, because some conversations between the dead and the living are none of our business, except to make sure they are not lost. And you now, if you are holding a reproduction, or sitting in front of a screen, or standing in front of glass, will make the same journey the picture has offered every onlooker since a lamp warmed its emulsion. You will be lured by ceremony and then caught by the eyes. You may attempt to diagnose. Was it fear, or grief, or defiance? You may decide these things are not mutually exclusive. You may invent a word for the expression that English does not provide, joylack, bridelash, kept breath, and then discard it because the right name is a person's name, and her name is Marion. You will see the crescent catchlights and imagine the wheel. You will see the faint swelling at her jaw and imagine a door that closes too quickly, and a mouth that refuses to say so, and the tender calculus of what to leave in a life when taking everything is impossible. You will see the small verticals between her brows and grant for a moment that maybe joy was not the point of that day. Maybe endurance was. Maybe witness. What does the photograph want? It does not want to persuade you to despise a man who was not cruel. It does not want to make you worship a woman who was not perfect. It wants you to practice a way of looking that allows more than one story to live on a single face. It wants you to notice the half-rounds in pupils as much as the bow in hair. It wants you to accept that sometimes the most loving act a picture can perform is to refuse the lie its subjects think they owe the room. If you own a red pencil, if the modern world has made you fond of circling the hidden, resist the urge to draw on the glass. Circle in your mind. Or do better. The next time someone shows you a photograph and tells you what it is, ask where the subject's eyes have gone. Find the place beyond the lens where she is looking. Ask who might be there, under a blanket, behind a door, holding a ledger or a letter, a locket or a hand. Ask what wheel just turned. And if, later, you tilt the picture in a square of late afternoon light and the bride's expression softens for a breath, if the furrow relaxes and the pupils seem to accept the square catchlights that all the other faces in the album carry, you will not have fixed anything. You will have done something better. You will have joined the conspiracy the photograph offers, to forgive joy its failures, to give grief its due, to keep the eyes honest. When you close the case, do it gently. The brass clasp will thank you by agreeing to meet again. Put the portrait back where it lives, in a drawer, a fireproof box, a museum sleeve, your grandmother's parlor. Then go and look at someone you love while they are not performing for you. Learn their furrows, catch their catchlights. If you recognize even a sliver of Marion's expression, a person looking at what she loves and cannot yet keep, put your hand quietly over theirs and let the second fix itself in memory without a lamp or a lens. Not every portrait is made of paper. Some are made of mercy, and mercy, when you notice it, looks very much like a smile that refuses to pretend.